Before the garden bloomed, before Eve ever drew breath, something moved in the dark. Not an angel, not a beast, something in between. A shape older than the first dawn, whispering beneath the roots of creation itself. When the world was young, they say the wind carried a woman's voice, soft at first, then venomous. A voice that spoke of power, of defiance, of freedom from divine chains. In the void that came before Eden, shadows bled into the soil, and from those shadows rose a figure cloaked in silence and sin. They gave her many names across the ages, but the first whisper was always the same: Lilith, neither saint nor sinner, neither mortal nor divine. She was the storm that came before obedience, the unbound will before the garden gates were ever locked. But who was she, truly? The Garden of Eden was still untouched by sorrow, a realm where every leaf shimmered beneath an eternal dawn. Rivers curved like silver veins through the living earth, and the air itself seemed to breathe with divine rhythm. It was a world without echoes, without rebellion. Yet. But even in that perfection, a shadow coiled beneath the roots of creation. According to Jewish scriptures, from the very dust of the ground, two forms were shaped, not one. Adam and Lilith were born of the same soil, molded in the same breath, neither above nor below the other. Lilith was unlike Eve. She did not emerge from Adam's side, nor from any part of him. She was formed as his equal, equal in body, equal in will, equal in the fire that animated them both. Adam sought to rule the garden and all within it, but Lilith's eyes burned with something the heavens did not expect: refusal. She would not bow, not to Adam, and not even to the command of paradise that expected her silence. Long before her name appeared in Hebrew scrolls, Sumerian myths whispered of the Lilith, spirits of the wind and night haunting the edges of civilization. They were untethered, moving like storms through the moonlit dark, neither wholly evil nor benign. These ancient Lilith were said to slip through windows, ride the wind, and dwell where light faltered. Their freedom was their essence. And in those earliest echoes, Lilith stood among them, not as a demon, but as a primal force beyond man's authority. According to Jewish tradition, when Lilith and Adam were joined, she refused to lie beneath him. She claimed, "We were created equal. We are the same." But Adam would not yield. Their clash was not of flesh, but of will, a fracture in the perfect silence of Eden. This defiance became the first rebellion, not against God, but against the order that man sought to impose. In the alphabet of Ben Sira, it is written that Lilith, rather than submitting, spoke the hidden name of the Almighty. With that utterance, she tore herself free from Eden's soil and rose like a storm into the night. It was not the act of a seductress, but of one who would not be owned. Her name became a wind, carried far from the garden, echoing through the ancient world. According to Jewish scriptures, God sent 3 angels, Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjaloth, to bring her back. They found her by the Red Sea, among creatures of shadow and forgotten flame. She refused their demands. The angels warned her of punishment, of the children that would die because of her. But Lilith did not return. Her defiance was final. From that moment, the garden would remember her absence like a scar. Eve would come later, fashioned from Adam's rib, compliant, silent, unbound by ancient wind. But Lilith's story remained, whispered through temple halls and inked into sacred margins. She was the first to speak no, the first to leave, the first to defy the order of man. And so, According to both Sumerian myth and Jewish scripture, before sin entered Eden, rebellion had already taken root. It wore the face of a woman who refused to kneel. But rebellion does not end when it leaves the garden. It travels. It seeps through the cracks of civilizations, changes its name, wears new faces, and becomes a story whispered in different tongues. Long before the ink of holy texts dried, another figure was feared beneath the moonlit skies of Mesopotamia. In the shadowed heart of Babylon and Assyria, that whisper bore the name Lamashtu. She was not a gentle spirit. According to Babylonian and Assyrian myth, Lamashtu was a terror that crept in the night, neither god nor mortal, but a monstrous woman crowned with the power to bring both fever and fear. She was described with a lioness's head, a woman's body, and taloned feet, an image stitched together from primal dread. Her hands dripped with invisible plague. Her breath carried the weight of curses. They said she hunted the vulnerable, mothers in childbirth, infants in their sleep, the places where life was most fragile. The people of those ancient cities did not merely tell her story. They built their defenses against her. Archaeologists have unearthed clay incantation bowls, buried upside down beneath thresholds, inscribed with spiraling texts meant to trap demons within their words. In those etchings, Lamashtu's name is invoked again and again, like a fever dream burned into the clay. Around her, protective spells curve inward, forming a prison of language, a barrier made not of walls, but of fear. At night, as the Euphrates moved like a serpent beneath the moon, priests and mothers alike whispered the same charms, ancient Akkadian prayers scratched into the dark. They believed Lamashtu could slip through the window like a wind, drink the breath of newborns, and leave silence behind. To guard against her, amulets were tied around necks, depicting Pazuzu, the demon king, who was believed to be the only force able to drive her away. Fear had given birth to ritual, and ritual had given birth to memory. And somewhere in that shifting current of terror, the face of Lamashtu bled into the figure of Lilith. Though born in different ages, their shapes began to mirror one another. Both women of the night, both feared at the threshold between life and death. The Lamashtu of clay bowls and the Lilith of Scripture became entwined in a tapestry of ancient dread, indistinguishable to those who huddled beneath the same stars. This fear moved not like armies, but like smoke, soft, invisible, relentless. It passed from Babylon to Canaan, from Assyrian laments to Jewish incantations. It carried the image of a night demon, beautiful yet venomous, alluring yet deadly, a whisper that the darkness itself was alive. To the people of that time, demons were not metaphors. They were neighbors in the dark, breathing just beyond the door. When a child sickened or died in the night, they did not blame the wind. They named her, and so the myth of Lilith grew not from one soil, but from many, layer upon layer of ancient fear, stitched together by trembling hands. In Eden, she was rebellion. In Babylon, she was hunger. And in both, she was the shadow that entered without asking. The world had begun to shape her into something new, not just a figure of defiance, but a living symbol of terror that mothers prayed to keep away. But myths, like rivers, do not remain still. They deepen. They carve through new lands, gathering layers of meaning until they become something else entirely. Centuries after Babylonian whispers turned her into a creature of the night, Lilith's name drifted like smoke into the hidden chambers of Jewish mysticism. There, beneath the quiet pages of the Zohar, she was not merely a terror to mortals. She was something far older, far darker. She was the queen of demons, a shadowed reflection of the sacred feminine. Mystics of the Middle Ages believed that the world we see is only half the story. Behind the tree of life, they spoke of another realm, an inverted mirror of creation where the divine light faltered and curdled into shadow. This realm was called the Qliphoth, the husks, the shells, the broken remnants that cling to the light, but are not of it. If the tree of life held divine order, the Qliphoth was its beautiful, terrible fracture. And at the root of that abyss, Lilith reigned. No longer just the woman who walked away from Eden, no longer the wind demon of Babylon. She became the embodiment of the dark feminine, the other half of what was never meant to be divided. They said she ruled not with cruelty, but with seduction, a queen who wore shadows like silk, who whispered the secrets of the forbidden to those who dared to listen. In the Zohar, she is described as the consort of Samael, the angel of death, together forming the dark union, the mirror of Adam and Eve. Their bond is not love as mortals know it, but a binding of forces, a merging of rebellion and destruction. Where Eve represents divine creation, Lilith represents the seductive power of chaos, the pull toward forbidden knowledge, the intoxicating sweetness of disobedience. Mystics believe that she moves through the spaces between prayers, feeding on the unguarded, weaving temptation into thought like a silk thread through fabric. She is the night wind that stirs when the lamps burn low, the voice that asks, what if power lies not in obedience, but in refusal? The Qliphoth is not a place of fire and brimstone. It is colder than that, a realm of hollow light, of beauty that wounds, of whispers that make men believe they have chosen freely, when in truth they have been chosen. Here, Lilith is not a screaming demon, but a sublime and dangerous presence, elegant in her darkness. She is the crown of this shadowed tree, the queen whose throne is built on the edges of divine order. In mystical texts, she is invoked not just as a monster, but as a force of knowledge, one that grants power at a price. She is the forbidden current beneath holy waters, the answer to prayers no one dares to speak aloud. Those who sought her did not cry out in fear, they whispered. They asked for what heaven denied. And so Lilith's image changed once again. The terror that once lurked in nursery shadows became something more refined, more potent, a dark goddess cloaked in wisdom and allure. No longer the howling wind at the window, she now stood at the threshold of the soul, offering a choice. She had become both a curse and a crown, both temptation and power, and her name, once a fearful murmur in the night, was now carved into the secret language of mystics, a queen in the realm of shadows, mirrored against the divine, waiting for those who dare to cross the veil. But no myth remains untouched forever. The centuries turned like a grinding wheel, and Lilith's name, once whispered in temples and hidden texts, crossed the sea into a world consumed by fear. In medieval Europe, her crown was stripped and reforged into something new, something colder. Here, she was no longer the queen of shadowed wisdom. She became the night hag. Europe was a land where superstition clung to every gust of wind. The nights were long and merciless, the stars dim behind rolling clouds, and every creak of wood or breath of wind could carry something unseen. In this dark world, the ancient Lilith was reborn in stories told by trembling mouths. Mothers warned their children of a woman who slipped into bedchambers beneath the cover of night. Men spoke of waking in the dark, unable to move, as something cold pressed against their chest, a weight like hands, a presence like smoke. They called her many names, but her essence remained the same: the succubus, the night visitor, the bringer of unholy desire and suffocating fear. Her myth entwined with medieval witchcraft like ivy around rotting stone. The church, facing unrest and uncertainty, found power in fear. And Lilith's image, already centuries old, was twisted into a weapon. She was no longer just a creature of shadows. She became the embodiment of female danger, a face that could be painted on any woman who dared to live outside the narrow boundaries set by men. In the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, the witch hunter's manual written in 1487, Lilith's traits can be traced between the lines. The authors spoke of demons that seduced men in their sleep, of women who made pacts with infernal powers, of midwives and healers accused of stealing newborns in the night. These accusations were echoes of ancient myths, the old fears of Lamashtu and Lilith, now dressed in Christian robes. They said witches consorted with the devil. They said they rode on storms, danced in forbidden circles, whispered in the language of demons. They said they could choke a man in his sleep. But beneath every accusation lay the same shape: a woman who did not submit, who was too free, too unbound, too much like the first woman who refused to kneel. The art of medieval grimoires painted Lilith with bat-like wings and flowing hair, hovering over sleeping men, her eyes dark and unblinking. She was both beautiful and grotesque, a mirror of the fears that consumed a world terrified of its own shadows. And in those same centuries, hundreds of thousands of women, midwives, healers, widows, the poor, the different, were accused of being her daughters. Witch hunts swept through towns like wildfire, their flames fed by sermons and whispered rumors. In those pyres and prisons, Lilith's legend lived on, reshaped into the image of every woman burned as a witch. She became the face of forbidden womanhood, the one who moved at night, who desired, who defied. But there was something the hunters never understood. Every time they spoke her name as a curse, they kept her alive. Every witch tried, every woman accused, every night terror described was another echo of the same ancient voice from Eden: the night hag, the succubus, the witch, Lilith. She no longer needed temples or grimoires. She lived in fear itself, woven into the hearts of those who believed the darkness belonged only to men, never to women who dared to hold power. But fear has a strange way of aging. It doesn't fade away. It reshapes itself. What once crept through midnight corners now walks beneath neon light. What once was whispered in sermons now echoes boldly across pages, stages, and voices that no longer tremble. Lilith did not vanish when the witch hunts ended. She lingered in silence, buried beneath centuries of ash, waiting for the world to change. And when it did, her name resurfaced, not as a curse, but as a banner. As the tides of the 20th century turned, movements rose against the chains of old authority. Lilith emerged in their language, not as a demon, but as a symbol of rebellion and self-possession. She became the figure of the first woman who refused to kneel. Art began to reshape her image. Books gave her new meaning. No longer the child snatcher, no longer the corrupter. She became the one who defied subjugation. Her figure stood tall on protest signs. Her sigil found its way into modern rituals, and her myth wove itself into stories that celebrated defiance rather than condemned it. In games, in fiction, in music, she became the woman who would not be silenced. Her name, once spoken with fear, became a language of power. She was no longer chained to scripture or confined to the margins of patriarchal myth. She became a mirror. And in that mirror, many women saw not a monster, but a reflection of their own resistance. Modern culture claimed her, reshaped her, and wore her like armor. Her presence bled into movements for gender equality, artistic expression, and spiritual independence. She was no longer the demon to be cast out, but the icon to be invoked. From demon to icon, Lilith rose again, not from Eden's ashes, but from centuries of silence. And perhaps that is what unsettles those who once tried to bury her. Not that she was ever a monster, but that she was never one to begin with. She no longer waits to be written into someone else's story. She writes her own. Darkness has a memory. It does not forget the names carved into its silence. And so, even when temples crumbled and tongues changed, one name continued to move like smoke through the corridors of time. It was whispered over cradles and carved into amulets. It clung to night winds and settled in the hollows of old houses where no one dared to sleep alone. Lilith, she has worn many faces: wind demon, serpent bride, night hag, queen, icon. Empires rose and fell, but her shadow did not. It slipped through myths, reshaping itself in every age, refusing to be buried. Even when her story was twisted, even when she was turned into a warning, she remained, listening. And perhaps that is the truth that lingers at the edge of every flame. Myths do not die. They bend, they evolve, they wait. When we shut our windows against the night, when the wind slides through the cracks like a breath too close, when the air feels colder than it should, somewhere in that stillness, something ancient listens back. We may have rewritten her, renamed her, cursed her, and crowned her. But the question remains, a whisper just beyond the ear's reach. Was Lilith ever truly banished? Or did we just stop listening to the wind at night? The story ends, but her shadow does not.